Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Autodesk Developer Summit. Thank you for being here. I know it's getting late in the day. This is our last session of the day. So a couple of things before we get started. There will be a Q&A period at the end. So if you have any questions, just remember them, hold on to them, and we will get to them. There are 2 mics in the aisles. So when the session is over, you can line up behind the mic and ask your question. The session is also recorded, so if you were scanned on your way in, you will receive the recording. And if you have your phone on you, which I assume you do, just put it in Do Not Disturb mode. All right, so our next speaker has an incredible 30-plus years in the industry. He's the co-founder and co-CEO of Imposter Entertainment. He's worked on some hit AAA games, mobile games, PC, VR, all of it. And today, he's going to be showing some examples emphasizing the importance of transparency and ethical training methods in AI. And I hope we all leave here today with a better idea of how to navigate AI with integrity. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Rade Stojsavljevic.
Hey, thanks, everyone. So we're going to talk about ethics in AI and all the questions that come about with using a new technology like that. So I've worked on a ton of different games at different companies, and one of the things I've always tried to do while I've been building these is do it in a responsible and ethical way. And last year, I started a company, Imposter Entertainment. The foundation of this was to use AI technology to develop new types of games that you just couldn't do before. Like, I looked at what a lot of other people were doing. They were looking at AI to reduce costs, improve iteration, and that's an awesome use of the tech, but that wasn't enough. I wanted to do something that just couldn't be done with conventional game methodologies. So I founded a company to do that. So let's get into it. So if you looked me up at all on LinkedIn, you might have seen this profile picture. Not a pixel of that is real. That's not me. I used an AI to generate that. I hate wearing a suit. A sport coat and jeans is about all I'll do. I don't own a blue suit at all, but I kind of want to buy one after seeing that pic. I thought I looked good in it. There were some other pics that didn't quite look like me, and there was one that is too embarrassing to put out there. It looked like the dude on the frozen fish sticks you see in the supermarket, and I was just not having that. I know the internet. We're not putting that out in public. It's getting recorded. We're not doing that at all. So I didn't see anything weird doing this. Like, I didn't want to go through and hire a photographer to do a headshot. And my thinking was, all right, well, if I did a professional photo, it would be retouched. We all, if we ever take a headshot, we tend to do that, get flattering lighting, put on some nice clothes, maybe makeup, and then edit out anything on it. But is it different if you're using AI? So, some things to consider. What's your intent with using the AI tech? If you're trying to improve, you're fine. If you're trying to deceive, it's not so cool. Do you know what the cultural sensitivities are of any particular market? We tend to be very Western-focused in the US and aware of our concerns here, but what about in other territories where we're shipping titles? AI is going to magnify those problems, and if you don't have an understanding of those markets, you could get yourself in some hot water. And then what's the limit? Like, how far is too far? There's no good answer to this. There have been a lot of interesting discussions around various things like this in the history of US law, and a lot of times the answer is, well, you'll know it when you see it. And that can get you into a weird spot if you're not careful, because by the time everyone sees it, it could be too late. So our agenda today, we're going to go through a bunch of different stuff. We're going to talk about AI, demystify it a little bit, hopefully, talk about various components of AI content generation, training, why it's important to be transparent, how you could collaborate with different disciplines and other people using the technology, and then how do you use it ethically in AI. And then we'll leave about 10, 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer if I blast through these slides, to get into questions and engage with that live. So I'm going to be really quick on this one. I'm assuming most people have looked this up if you're in this talk. How does generative AI work? There's 3 broad components. You train a model on a very large data set. You tune it. That usually means you mark the content for what it is. So it needs to know, for example, this is a car, that's a hat, that's a house, those sorts of things. You generate the content, And then if you're not careful, there's another loop that comes back where the generated content feeds back into the AI, and you get into something called model collapse, and that's when weird things like hallucinations can happen. So training data, some things you want to think about. It takes a ton of data to train an AI. You need to make sure you have the right to train on that data. And in fact, there's a ton of lawsuits going on right now, actively, in the United States and elsewhere. It's unclear how that's going to be resolved. You have to be careful about the input that you're putting into it. If you're training a model on a particular art style, it has to ingest enough of this stuff to be able to regurgitate it and create new content from that. And then you got to be careful that too much of the AI-generated content doesn't feed back into the model again and collapse the model. Most of the time, if you're working with these tools, you're not going to train your own data. You're going to use something that's open source or off the shelf. But if you are, you got to be really cautious about how that's being done. And then you got to figure out, if I use an AI to generate this content, will I get sued? So I did a little experiment. I went into an AI tool, and I said, give me a superhero. And this is what it gave me. And so I think if we use that one, we can pretty much all agree I would get sued by DC, because I don't have the rights to do Superman in my game, and you don't want to do that. It's pretty cool looking, just on one prompt, but you start to think about, all right, what was put into this model that I don't know about, right? Like, I may not know about a particular territory. For example, maybe there's a superhero character in Turkish fiction that I just don't know about because I don't watch that stuff, and if I'm releasing content in there and I accidentally stole it, like, what's going to happen to me? It's scary. And then you got to be careful about bias in training data. This is where things it just get picked up by the model that you just didn't expect. And I'll give you a kind of a hypothetical example using a Star Trek reference. This is an original series Star Trek episode. The premise on this one was there's two beings left, the last two people of this race. One was black on the left side, one was black on the right side. They hated each other, and they were fighting, like, basically for eternity. And the crew tried to explain to them how silly this was. But if one of the guys was training the model, it would be biased against the other, and likewise. Like, how do you keep that out of your AI when you're training it? That's just a hypothetical example, but this happened last week. I read this interesting article. There's propaganda coming in from a Russian state-sponsored company trying to influence AIs by writing fake articles and trying to pollute it, and the AI doesn't know what it's ingesting, so it just grabs that and regurgitates that content. So it's dangerous because these things are not transparent. You don't know what's going in there. AI is really a mirror of the society and the data that goes into it. So if a group of people dislikes another group or has a particular view, the AI is going to reflect that. And so there's an interesting video about this where Jim Cameron, the filmmaker, is giving a talk about Terminators and AI weapons, right? Who says who's the bad guy? It's the person that programs it. Are they right? I don't know. Maybe. It depends on your perspective. So keep an eye out for that. You can do things accidentally pretty easily with AI tools, and they can spread very quickly. And then what happens when you train a bot on 2025 data, and 5 years from now, something changes? You know, jokes that used to be considered cool are now wildly inappropriate. The AI needs to be retrained. How are you going to do that? How are you going to purge all that old data in there? This hasn't been answered yet. The tech is too new, but that's going to be a thing that's going to happen. All right, so training the data for the model, now you got to tune it. How do you label the data? How do you make sure that as users are putting in there, you're mitigating risk from bias creeping into your data? How do you make sure it's accurate? If you're relying on humans or your players to help refine and train your model, do you have the right to do that? And you make sure you have a really robust terms of service in your program so that you can make sure that you can use that data. Just a little analogy, one of the contracts that I just recently did, for my company, we weren't allowed to use any user data in our model. And so I had to explain to the lawyers at the publisher, well, if we did that, your AI will never evolve and it's going to be problematic. They just didn't get it, so I had to walk them through and give a variation of this talk to them. Data privacy and protection laws, like if you're going to ingest user data, you have to be cognizant about how you store that. So personally identifiable information, is it stripped out? You want to make sure you don't run afoul of any international laws there. What's in your specific product terms of service? If you're using open source technology, you need to look at that one, and then you need to look at yours as well. All right, the fun part. You're generating content. You've got your model trained, it's labeled, it's ready to go. Who owns the output? That's a big unknown right now. Is the output repeatable? So you've got basically two types of models you'll see now. One is deterministic, one is not. And so if you're trying to art direct a project and you're putting in the same input but getting subtle variations each time, it's kind of a useless product for anything beyond concept work. And so you need to watch out for that. Can you copyright anything that you create for AI? Who thinks you can copyright AI-generated content? Or just raise your hand if you think you can. All right, one person is right. You can, but there's a caveat. So this is where it gets really tricky. If it's purely AI-generated, meaning there was no human intervention at all, can't copyright it. But if there's a material human creative component to it, could be through the prompt, if it's complex enough, you actually can. It's not entirely well tested yet. So if you're going to put art from an AI tool right into your product, you want to be careful. Who owns prompts? If it's a sufficiently complex and unique prompt and counterprompt that generates a piece of specific artwork in a deterministic AI generative tool, who owns that? I have no idea. This hasn't been tested yet, so we're going to find out. Then there's US law versus international law. It's changing constantly. Get a lawyer. Like seriously, this is some scary stuff. You could put out a product and get it taken down and basically just lose your business. All right, let's talk a little bit about transparency. And this is where a lot of opinion comes into play, I think, on what you need to do with products. All right. You've got customers, and you have an obligation to them. What do you think it is? Personally, I think it's critical to be transparent with any gamer in particular about what AI you're using, what's human-generated, what you're doing with their data. If you don't do that, you're going to really get a bunch of pissed-off gamers, and they're going to be trashing your product, and like that is not a place you want to be in. I've been there. Reading those comments absolutely sucks. It is not fun. It can be soul-crushing. If you're using data, what are you using it for? Be honest. What if there's a takedown notice? You know, if you're using AI at a relatively small team, you don't have a big customer service group, or you don't have a community team, what's the equivalent of a Digital Millennium Copyright Act or DMCA takedown notice? Do you have 24 hours, 48 hours to take the thing down if someone says this is a copyright violation? Are you even checking that to make sure it is? Can you check it? Because you don't know how it was generated in the machine. I don't have a good answer for that. I'm going to face that with my own product in probably 4 months when we launch the thing. There's a really good quote from Gabe Newell that I like to use. It's like, you just don't lie to the internet. Gamers in particular are smarter than you individually, and they will deconstruct any kind of spin that you've got and poke holes in it, and you will pay a terrible price if you lie to gamers. So just don't do it. Be honest. All right, what slide is up there? All right. How are you using AI in your product? Is it to improve gameplay? Is it to generate textures? Is it original characters? Whatever. Just be clear to your customer in it. There was a recent piece of marketing material that came out from a Call of Duty product where AI was used to generate the screenshot, and they didn't say anything. And there was a pretty decent-sized backlash. I don't think it hurt their sales at all, but like there was a lot of chatter generated around that one. This is not a good story that you want to have, and I think if you're honest with your customer of what you're doing, you just won't have that problem. I did not use any AI to write this presentation. I'm being transparent about that. I really, really wanted to. Other than that headshot picture of me, this is all me, for better or worse. So there's an interesting new law that just got proposed in Spain, and I saw a similar one in China as well, requiring AI-generated content to be labeled as AI-generated. That's primarily to combat disinformation in the news and political space, but it's going to apply to everything else. And the penalties that I saw proposed were pretty steep. So you want to be careful, again, about labeling your product. Just being upfront and honest with people. So I'm pretty sure what's going to happen with AI in games is there's going to be a backlash. And there's just a lot of crap being spewed about what AI can and can't do, and just a lot of nonsense. And I think at the end of the day, gamers are really particularly smart, more so than most other customers, about assessing value of a product. And if you're generating a ton of content in a game, and it costs you pennies to do that, but you're still trying to charge $50, $60, $70 or whatever ongoing cost for your product, they're going to look at that and like, well, why am I paying this much for something that wasn't generated by a designer or a human? It was generated by a machine. Is it really worth it? Why aren't you bringing the cost down and passing that savings on to me? And that could manifest itself with products being boycotted or just people turning against it, or possibly some sort of group. Like this is a guild that was formed by authors for books, where they'll put a sticker on a product that say this was actually generated by a human and not a machine. Are we going to have an equivalent for that? Like, is the IGDA going to do that for games? I don't know. I could see us easily going that route, but I do think that if we're not clear and honest with our customers, they're going to be pretty upset with us. And so I would just advocate get ahead of it. All right, so how do you integrate AI into game development? And there's a ton of different ways to do that. I'm just going to talk about the methodology that we're using at Imposter Games. And we can probably talk some more in the Q&A a little bit later. So general beliefs that I have is you can enable new types of games not previously done using AI tech. That's why I founded this company. I just didn't want to do the same thing again. I wanted to do something different. And so that's what we're using tech to do. I think we could get iteration. And if there's one thing I've seen in 30 years in games that's as close to a law as possible, is that iteration equals better games every single time. So more advanced tools don't matter if it doesn't improve iteration. It's like the more turns at that wheel you get on the product is just going to make it better and better and better. And it's pretty obvious you could reduce cost using AI. And I think just in the forefront, particularly in AAA and Western games, like just our cost structure has gotten out of control. And we've got to figure out how to build games a little bit cheaper, maybe not spend $500 million on a dozen AAA games every year. That's kind of crazy. Really, for me, with the iteration side and the cost, like I didn't look at it as trying to displace artists or engineers or designers or something using AI tech. I wanted to get my iteration time done and improved early when my team was small and it was cheap. I don't want to do it later. So if I could figure out things while I'm still hiring people, I'm going to use AI tools to do that. And then just general productivity has gone up since we've been using these tools. So a couple things of what we're doing. We're doing a mobile game. We have NPC characters in it, and I'll walk through our pipeline and why we did some of the things that we did. So in general, with our pipeline, we started out designing kind of like our content style boards. This is the same thing we do, whether it's hand-generated or using AI. We settled on an art style and generated a style reference board for an external artist. And we hired actual concept artists to do all of our 2D concepts. And we did this for two reasons. One, I think it's the right thing to do to get a unique look, but more importantly, this step ensures we completely own the concept. We can copyright it. It's made by a human. There's accountability on that. If we copied somebody, I know who did it, I can talk to them, we could fix it. We took the 2D concept, face on shot, which you're going to see in a second, converted it to 3D. Took about 2 minutes. Didn't have to model anything. Then we cleaned it up and put it into the game. So these were two of the characters we did that were generated by our 2D artists. And that was the 3D stuff that took less than 2 minutes to create and export. The male character came out pretty good. Some work needs to be done on shaders, but the whole thing was generated from that image you just saw, and we're pretty happy with it. We put it in the game from this. The female character, we had some issues. This one, something is weird going on with the mouth there. Looks like some plastic surgery was done. Doesn't look like it was done well. Doesn't look right. We have to fix it. We have 2 ways that we can fix this in the tool. There's a little slider in there that lets the AI have a little bit more creativity. And as you bump that slider, it fixes this problem, but the character stops looking like the concept. So what was the dilemma for us on that one? Do we let it go that route, or do we go in there and touch it up? And we chose to have a 3D artist go in there and fix it. It's not the most efficient way to do it, but we get closest to the style guide, which is what I wanted. Where else might you use some AI tools in your product? Texture map generation is huge. Like, there's absolutely no reason to have somebody go take reference photos, of bricks or stones or something like that when you can just have an AI do it, and it does a really good job. Procedural content. So imagine you're building a city in one of your games, and you set up rules, or you had an AI look at a city like Paris, for example, and infer rules based on the construction there about where do I have to put a fire escape in a building? How tall can buildings be in a residential area? You can get all of that with a big enough sample set of AIs so that when you start building something in a cityscape and building backgrounds, the AI could spend a lot of that time generating that content for you. So you could work on foreground content and let all the background work go into the machine and have it do that. If you're building something in New York, for example, it's going to infer what the height of a building is from an external fire escape versus internal. So the higher they go, they don't need that, but under a certain height, they have to have it. And that defines the unique characteristics of that city, and the AI can just do that for you. Parameterized modeling is a pretty cool thing that you can do. And so this is anything where you could set up a series of rules. We saw early versions of this with things like speed tree when you're building forests and everything. You can take it a step further and use AI to do that and just give it a bunch of rules based on your game and have it generate that content. So again, you're spending all of your effort focused on the player interactable content and the foreground content instead of work in the background. Scene reconstruction is a huge one, and I'm going to give you a specific example of something that we did with this, or that I would have wished we could have done with this. So there's image to 3D. You saw that in that concept that I just showed you a minute ago, but there's also video to 3D. So early in my career, I worked on the Blade Runner adventure game, and we went through and we had to create these scenes that were from the movie in 3D. And so the way we did that is, I don't know how many of you remember laser discs back in the day, but there were 2 different types. There was one of them that lets you go frame by frame, but you could only put 30 minutes on one of those gigantic discs. We had a Laserdisc player in every artist's office, and they advanced frame by frame to recreate these shots. We went and recorded somebody, a local actor, to do the mint eating. We couldn't use the Pan Am logo, so you see this weird little thing over there because Pan Am was defunct there. We couldn't get the rights on it. It took about 2 months to one artist to generate a scene like this. With video to 3D tech, you could do this in about 2 minutes. It's nuts. Wish we had that tech, we didn't. All right, some things that AI won't do. It is not going to be creative. It can't be. It's not in its nature. If you have a specific vision in your head for what you want to do, don't use an AI tool to do that. Maybe help you use it you can refine that idea, but you're much better off putting pen to paper or mouse to screen and generating it by hand. It doesn't work on a subconscious level. It has no subconscious. So what do I mean by that? So in film, there's an idea of an image sequence or image structure that you can put into a movie and give you a lot of interesting, subtle things. So I pulled some scenes from Casablanca. If you've watched that film, you'll see bars repeated everywhere, either in the lighting, in the shadows, in the stripes in the outfit. There's a spotlight from the airport there that kind of looks like a prison guard tower, and all of it is trying to reinforce this idea that these characters are trapped in the film. There is no way for an AI to understand that intent from your designers and build that into your art or your product. That requires a human who has a pretty high degree of skill and understands creativity and can do that for you. And this stuff is really powerful. It makes a huge difference psychologically in a film, but it also makes a difference in a game. Uh-oh, I think I got stuck. Iteration time. This is the critical thing for me that I think AI is going to change everything in games. It's just going to make iteration time shrink dramatically. So this is good and it's bad. It's going to put early stage game development art generation in the hands of non-artists. So whenever I've built a product, we used to have programmer art in it, and it was the most hideous stuff that you could possibly build, not because programmers aren't artistic, but it's not final art, and you want it to be identifiable as not final art. We would use like ridiculous colors in there, so you knew if you ever saw this in the product when QA was testing it, you would strip it and put out real art. Well, the AI stuff is going to look pretty good and probably too good, and you don't want that stuff to sneak in there. So you might want to figure out a way to put a digital marker in there so you don't have that problem. Artists are going to move up market in skills. So, for example, there was an entry-level position in art for a while, rotoscoping, where you would hand paint out things frame by frame in various different film scenes. Like, that just doesn't exist anymore. Digital matte paintings can track and remove a lot of that stuff. It's not something we need anymore. And we've seen this in other industries, right, where skills have moved up to higher value stuff. Art direction is the one thing that is not going to change. It's going to be more important. So if you're prompting an AI, knowing the fundamentals of how to art direct a scene, how to do a shot, like I was trying to make a pose for one of the characters, and I kept telling it, for example, I want the camera low. And it kept putting a damn camera in the scene like that. It's like, no, I want the camera shooting the scene to be at a low angle and put it up there. And my art director came in and she's like, yeah, you want a low shot. I'm like, oh God, I just used the wrong terminology. I didn't think about that. I put it in there, it got it. This is even more critical when you start counter-prompting. And so that's when you kind of squeeze the model from both ends, where you tell it what you want over here, but explicitly what you don't want. And if you have the language that an artist has to describe that, you will get much, much better results in there. I'm not an artist. I do not have that language that well. I just pretend to be one on occasion. And if you're not careful, it can let you climb pretty far up down the path of one of those Dunning-Kruger effects where you think you know a lot more than you do, and you just get in trouble with that. Procedural art tools, again, as they start getting integrated into engines, I think are going to be pretty critical. I don't think any artist can afford to use or to ignore AI. Like the notion that it's going to produce crap or it's going to go away is just nonsense. It's a tool. It's one of the most powerful tools I've ever seen in my career, and it's just going to keep getting better. But anytime there's a transition into a new technology or a new business, it's really rough. It's really clear there's a lot of jobs that are going to go away and they're not going to come back. And I don't know where it's going to settle. Are we going to have the same number of open positions in games art as before? I have no idea. I worry that it won't. But we'll see what happens with that. I think new types of jobs are going to open up. We'll see what those pan out to be. I do not like to get in the prediction business on specifics like that because you tend to look pretty foolish when you're wrong about that, but that's something you want to watch out for. And if you're a non-artist, you're not suddenly going to become brilliantly creative. It just isn't going to happen. I remember when the games business transitioned from 2D to 3D, some things that I heard from artists. 3D art has no soul. It's machine generated. 3D artists are programmers. They're not real artists. So I think if you watched a Pixar film, like the notion that 3D art doesn't have a soul is just absolute nonsense. All right, thank you. We're going to open it up to Q&A. So if you'd like to line up. Somebody's got to have a question.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really helpful. The question that I have, based on what you said, even some position will get eliminated and some new position may open up in the video game industry. still you need to have that fundamental and basic knowledge of art to be able to work for those positions despite that improvement of the technology.
Yeah, if there's one thing I could recommend for any artist is really work on leveling up your communication skills. We see this a lot in games where we just don't have great language to describe game mechanics or tools, and it's like a lot of times it's just easier to show in the game engine. On the art side, art's been around a lot longer. There's a lot more language about shading and lighting techniques and how you do that. How you can communicate that to other people about like, okay, great, you generated, for example, if you're working with a producer or designer who built a bunch of stuff in an AI tool and they're happy with it, but you look at it and to your eye, you're like, this is not continuous. It doesn't make sense in this universe. Highlighting the specific problems about like why this works, why that doesn't work, why what you're trying to convey intent-wise is not being served by the art that's created, I think is critical. And that's just like a fundamental skill that's beneficial for any artist using AI tools. Specifically around that is understanding the techniques of how some of the shots are made. So if you're a traditional 3D artist and you're focused on how things are built and constructed, we're used to talking about faces and verts and things like that. And that's still important for a real-time engine. But when an AI is generated content, it doesn't generate stuff like that. It generates final pixels based on what it thinks it looks like. And so you start getting back to the fundamentals about camera aperture and lighting, and does it have bokeh? Does it have, where's the focus on this? Like all those kind of things of how a scene is shot start to matter a lot more, and that might not be a fundamental skill that you've refreshed and used a lot. Maybe you did it in early years in art school, but you might not be doing it in day-to-day 3D. Those are critical to bring back, because you need that as input for the tools.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I have a lot of questions and thoughts, but I'll try to pare it down. If you care about owning your own IP, making sure that it's unique, and if you care about the authenticity of your product and worry about the myriad of legal complications, then your solution, as you stated, was hire an artist to take care of those things. At what point do you say, well, maybe we shouldn't be using the AI to generate our final product?
I think it comes down to the product entirely, right? So what I'm not advocating, just to be clear, if someone wants to build their entire project the traditional way, hey, have at it. If you can make that make sense for your customer and for the market and you can sell that, that is awesome. I respect that and I love that. But if you're competing against other folks that are making something demonstrably similar, that still has a high degree of human control, but maybe it's 80% human built versus 100%, and they're undercutting you in cost. And it's the same product. And I know, like, rarely do we do two games that are identical, but if it's close enough, are you at a competitive disadvantage where you might lose in the market and you might not be able to sell as many product, or you take longer and they beat you to market? Like, that's a very product-specific decision, right? I can't answer that without having a lengthier discussion about the product you're doing, but to not use a tool because you think it has to be completely hand-generated when, like, yeah, that's not what you're asking, yeah. But like, there's a fine line on that. What I would not recommend is going the opposite extreme. It's like, we're just gonna all generate that with the machine. Like I've seen, if you look at LinkedIn, there's all this nonsense about like, hey, I'm an AI filmmaker. I'm like, really? Like you're using an AI to generate a film? I just watched what you generated, and I commented on one guy's thing. I said, if that came into my company in an artist's reel, you wouldn't even get an interview. Like it was just so bad. But then there's other stuff that's layered in there. It's like you start thinking about like, what was it like before we had flocking behavior for 3D art or really good particle systems where you had to hand generate all that stuff? Like, is it cheating to have the machine do that and put physics in there? Some people thought it was when that came about. I'm like, yeah, but it's better now. Like, look at what I'm getting with like rocket trails and smoke and all sorts of stuff. It's just better as the technology advances. And I think like that's the line that I'm interested in exploring and kind of following that path with AI. But everyone's going to have a different take on that.
So do you think it's valid then to change the narrative from AI being the thing that gets you your final result to a tool that you use to get that final result?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks looked at it and they saw generative AI, you're like, holy crap, this is magic, right? Look at the thing that is generated. But then you start poking and digging deeper and you're like, it has a lot of problems. Like, do I really want to have to go through every other frame and make sure it doesn't have 6 fingers in one and 5 in another? That still happens. Do I want to have better lighting so it doesn't have that AI art look that's pretty common with diffusion models that you see today? It's just really weird, and it's evolving. I'd be curious to see where it goes. What I'm advocating is we have to be really conscious about how we approach it, and cautious. Like, these are human choices that should be made by people, like creative people in particular.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is T. Thank you for the talk. I really appreciate it. And I work in concept art and art direction for games. And as someone who has a background in fine art and who's learned all the ins and outs of the fundamentals and just concept art, I've become really interested in sort of like this relationship between machine learning, AI, and how it can be used as like a co-pilot or a partner in the creative process without entirely replacing it, even as just a traditional artist learning everything by hand. And so can you share sort of like what tools that your team uses in your pipeline, or is that like private?
Yeah, I can share that. So we, the concept work for the style reference guide was done in Leonardo.
Argo?
Leonardo,
Oh, Leonardo.
like Leonardo da Vinci. It's basically an art tool. And that one's pretty interesting because it's trying to do 2 things. It's trying to cater to professionals and non-professionals alike. And so there's a mode in there that you can play around with where you put in a basic prompt like that superhero that I did. I literally typed superhero, and it generated a prompt based on that had a bunch more detail. I kind of cheated by not showing what it generated, but then it spits out that image. You can bypass all of that and then write the prompt yourself, and then you get a lot more repeatable, accurate results. So that's the concept tool that we did. I'm spacing on the name for the conversion tool that we used from the 2D image to 3D. I want to say Aardvark, but I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I'm pretty sure it starts with an A, but if you message me, I'll find out the name from my tech artist, and I'll happy to share that with you. So that was the conversion tool that we did with that. And then our proprietary stuff that we're doing at Imposter is our character itself. The personalities that we put behind that, that's our own model. Like, that's just something that I probably wouldn't want to get into specifics about, because that's a key differentiator for us. But the art tools that we're using are off the shelf. All of the 3D art was hand-touched and edited in Maya. We pulled it in there and we did final adjustments on that, and then we're going to do the shader work as well using that.
What about video to animation?
Video animation, there's a couple tools. There's nothing out there that I'm really happy with that I would recommend at this point. They all are either really expensive or they have some serious problems. The best tools that I've seen cannot generate more than just various different shorts, and they're primarily good at manipulating existing stuff. They're not good at generating brand new content and animating that content. So it would be, for example, if I took a still of me like this and I'm like, I want to animate that. And where we're at Imposter, investigating that tech, is we've seen some promising stuff where I can take video of an actor without fiduciary marks all over their face and capture the animation on that and then translate that using the AI tools onto the 3D model. And that's pretty interesting stuff. Where I think it might be, and it's not proven yet, that I might be able to get it going is then also taking AI-generated text to voice in different languages and have the mouth movements match those individual languages. That's some cutting-edge stuff. I don't think it's ready yet, but I'm pretty excited about that because now I could take these live products that I'm working on and localize them in all these different territories and not have weird lip-syncing problems and other things. And that would be awesome if that pans out. And jury's out whether or not it does.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take up too much time, but I think that's really cool that you mentioned that. And even just coming from a talk on UGC, I think it's awesome that essentially every developer in this room, whether they're working for a company or not, could essentially just generate and create like their own game for fun using a lot of these tools. So
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. And like UGC is another angle that I think we're just scratching the surface on that. Like so much money was spent. I remember like when I was at EA and Maxis was working on Spore, they built that editor for the characters. They spent a ton of time trying to recreate the equivalent of Maya for the layperson. And it was still a pain for them to use. They still didn't like manipulating things in 3D using a 2D interface was just weird for a lot of people. You move all that into AI and move it into natural language tools and everything, like the quality of UGC should go up dramatically. So like I know Roblox is playing with that in their platform, and we're just going to see more of that.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. My question is, based on how you describe your studio and like the emphasis and being so upfront about how you are leveraging AI for the work, how do you now approach recruitment and essentially finding talent and also the interview process for the talent? And also, how do you see it in future panning out, both on the art side and on the technical side? Because both of them have AI tools available to them. And I assume that that is something that is encouraged in your studio. So how do you approach in terms of the requirements that you have in the recruitment process?
Yeah, so on the recruitment side, like this is, not to be cavalier on the state of the industry, but it's really easy to get great talent if you're hiring right now. Easier than I've ever seen in my career because there's a ton of great people that are just out of work right now. So we look at the fundamentals on what people have done. We go through an art reel with all of our artists to make sure the content is in there. And if we see somebody passing off something that we think is obviously AI generated and not something that they did, we'll call them out on it. And that's a red flag, right? So if you're doing that in your demo reel, don't do that. Like you won't get past hiring with us very far. It's getting harder to spot that stuff, and there's no good way to kind of do a reverse image search on whether or not that stuff was AI generated or generated by the artist. But a lot of that can come out where we do on the interview a deconstruction of scenes where we ask them to describe what's wrong with this, how would you change this, how would you fix that? And it focuses on understanding a candidate's fundamental skills and whether or not they understand what's going on, how do they, like the basics, screen composition, lighting, characters, like why does this character look off? We'll put one in front of somebody, and if they can't answer that, that's usually indicative of some either lack of fundamental skills, artistic skills, or just they haven't had a refresher. Now that's not necessarily disqualifying. I want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt if they make it into the full-on interview. But it's one of a series of things that we start to probe for. The last part of your question is like, are we upfront with what we're doing with AI to candidates?
The same problem in the coding space, maybe, like for technical abilities. Like, would you let them use any coding tools in the coding interview that you have? Or are they strictly have to go through a problem, like a coding problem that doesn't assume having access to coding LLMs?
So we do restrict tools that can be used in the same way that I would with an engineer, right? I'm very cautious about open source software that's used and libraries to make sure we actually have the legal right to use this, because if you start digging into open source licenses, there's commercial use, there's not commercial use. Likewise in the art, I'll look at the terms of service of whatever tool that someone is using, and if there's anything in there that says even a whiff of the art tool owns the rights to whatever was generated, then there's a hard limit on what we'll use that tool for development. Maybe it's fine for our conference or concept and reference board, but nothing like that is ever going to go into our product. I want provenance on this. I want to know that we can own it. I want to know that if I put out a successful title, I'm not going to get sued once we make some money and become a fat target for patent trolls or AI trolls or whatever you're going to want to call them when they start suing people for stuff like that. I want to avoid that. So yeah, we're very careful about what we allow into the development process.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else?
Hey,
Yeah.
my question is, I built a procedural workflow that would do LLM prompt, then do image, then do 3D. And what I found is that it's kind of low quality on 3D part because open sourcely available models are much worse than like web services that you can buy, right? And counting on the difference between a data center and a locally like server at a small company, do you believe that we are kind of prisoners of these changing tools, changing services that you kind of have to use if you want to do it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our general philosophy at this stage of where the technology is to not, we tell everyone on the team, do not get married to a piece of technology and build a framework to adapt, to swap it out. My advice would be don't get tightly coupled to any one because just the tech is advancing too much, too quickly. The weird thing that's happening is most of these models, mostly on the language side, but it's also to some degree on 3D, have run out of content to ingest. And so you're not going to see materially improved quality of output. You'll probably see faster and less expensive generation once the tools get just better and tuned. But it's not materially going to make better stuff until there's a fundamental advancement in how the stuff works. Maybe it gets some ability to reason beyond what it's doing versus just doing large-scale pattern recognition and predictive algorithms and things like that. But like I've never seen tech move this fast. It's kind of scary, and it basically means you're building. I mean, to use an analogy, instead of building a house, you're kind of building a mobile home. You just got to just make it ready to move.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. My question is how you see all these AI tools affecting the dichotomy between, like, on one spectrum, maybe an individual creator or an indie studio a little bit further, and then on the right, like a AAA game. Just curious about any advantages that you've seen emerging for one side of that spectrum over the other. Kind of building off the last person's question as well, how everything is moving much more quicker, so maybe it lends itself to building a mobile home or a tent over a house. If you could just speak more on that concept, what you're seeing there.
So I'm going to take a step back and I had an interesting perspective when I was at Meta. So I ran all of their first-party development studios. I had 10 studios that I was managing over there, and I got to see a lot of different workflows all simultaneously working. And one thing that I think you're going to see with the AI tools is they're going to kind of normalize the quality difference. And so you can see some remarkably good-looking, stylized indie titles that look fantastic for what we're done with shockingly small teams for anyone that has been coming in from like AAA or even AA. I think you'll see the quality of those go up. I think you're going to see the cost side come down on AAA because a lot of those things that were done that cost a lot of money that were all generated by individual people could be pushed into the machine realm. What I don't see happening is the idea of, like there was this notion when generative AI first came out that you could take a $500 million AAA game and you're going to be able to use AI tools and you can make the thing now for $50 million. And it's not going to happen. The cost will come down. I don't know how much. Maybe it goes down to half, which would be like a pretty huge savings, but $250 million is still a pretty gigantic bet to make on a piece of content. So I think we'll see costs coming down on that end. I think we'll see quality going up on the independent side, but what I really worry about is, like, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but what I've seen consistently with a lot of indie developers I worked with is just the inability to edit. Like, they try to do too much, they take on too much, they focus on things that aren't the core of the product. And AI as a tool can enable you to build too much content or too much game versus focusing on the core that really differentiates your product. I think that's a place I would be careful of if I was working in the indie space, to not walk away from my core competency and try to, like, you shouldn't try to compete with a AAA. Like, you just shouldn't. That's like a 1,000-person team sometimes. Like, there's no reason to do that. Like, what makes indies special is they take risks that no one else can take. They execute incredible creative new ideas that you just aren't going to see anywhere, and they can do it to a high degree of polish. Play to that strength and use the tools to do that, not to compete in something that's not your core strength. Did that answer your question?
That was a really great answer. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Anyone else? We've got room for one more? Okay, one more question if you wanted. If not, we could all break and go get a drink somewhere or not.
If no one else is going to ask a question, side quest, I was just curious if you could share the last time that anything AI related brought you joy.
Oh man, that is an interesting one. So I'm going to talk about one of our own products that we were working on. So we were building these AI characters, and one of our engineers decided he wanted to grief it and start talking trash to it and everything. And so he created this ridiculous persona of this dude that came from like the Byzantine Empire, and he got brought forward in time and all this stuff, and he's chatting in a modern day thing, and he's asking this character, he's like, hey, I was trying to hook up with this other character in my game, but like I think this other guy is trying to put the moves on my girl. What do I do? He's like, you should slay him where he stands and eliminate all competitors. And he's like doing all this ridiculous stuff in there. And like he was trying to grief the AI characters to see what they would do, and this thing would not break character, and it was just spitting all this stuff back on him, and we're watching this in real time, just cracking up, and he's like furiously trying to break it, and he couldn't. It's like, I don't know, like it's the last time I can't remember before that laughing enough that my stomach hurt, and that happened to us last month, which was pretty cool. Right on. All right, thanks everyone.